It is my great pleasure to introduce our first speakers today, Diane Dubois and Robert Dalton Harris Jr., who I know many of you know. They are authors, editors, historians, independent scholars, and longtime proprietors of A Gathering, a business that deals in ephemera and original source materials. For 15 years, they published PS, a quarterly journal of postal history. For over 20 years, they edited the Postal History Journal. They have both been inducted to the APS Philatelic Writers Hall of Fame and the ASDA Philatelic Dealers Hall of Fame. In 2016, the two were awarded the Luff Award for Excellence in Philatelic Research. Pair also shares the Ephemera Society of America's highest honor, the Maurice Rickards Medal, which they received in 2008, for their continuing efforts at promoting understanding of the historical and cross-disciplinary importance of objects through well-researched, readily accessible writings. Rob and Diane.
Thank you. We are delighted to be here in person, and hello to everybody out there in Zoom land. In 1875, the main post office in New York City began moving into a purpose-built and expensive building after many decades in repurposed and inadequate spaces. In 1879, when the New York office was finally completed, a proud staff commissioned an elaborate New Year greeting card for the postal fraternity.
Proudly centered on the vignette of the new building and a portrait medallion of Thomas Lemuel James, New York City postmaster since 1873, the card features images of mail distribution from top right, sorting by clerks, a mounted carrier in the country, the Transcontinental Railroad, speedy wagon transit within the city, steamship mail in the harbor, native courier, Civil War veteran carrier at pillar box.
In the center, atop the building's cupola, are letters addressed to Donaldson Brothers, the printers of the card. At that time, the New York office was considered preeminent for its organization. Postmaster General Frank Hatton could suggest nothing to improve its perfect service.
Would you read from the screen for them?
No, it's okay, not for this. A few years later, the New York office was in trouble and required a large infusion of cash to even successfully perform postal functions.
In 1890, over the years since 1863, the mail volume would have increased by almost an order of magnitude, overwhelming offices like New York City.
Nevertheless, in 1891, the New York office commissioned a New Year's card, but now aimed specifically at colleagues in the Universal Postal Union. An unusual gesture of collegiality from a city to members of an international organization in foreign countries.
And this was just the first in a series of 10 annual New Year's greetings that we've been able to document. What was the postal context for this outreach?
And what can the iconography of the cards themselves reveal?
Also in 1891, Congress provided support for American shipping, specifically to favor carrying United States mail, which would have be from the Port of New York.
American capitalists had invested in foreign ships and petitioned for United States registry for two of them, the City of New York and City of Paris of the British Inman Line, to make them eligible for mail pay.
Once in service, their names dropped the City of designation.
The Postmaster General Report for 1891 mapped the ocean mail service, showing how crucial New York was, not only to the lines connecting to Europe, but also to the multitude of connections among the Americas and even across the Pacific.
This was within the larger strategic question. In 1890, a United States Navy captain had observed
indications are not wanting of an approaching change in the thoughts and policy of Americans as to their relations with the world outside their borders.
the Universal Postal Union's Congress in Vienna in 1891 was extensively reported in the postal guides that were distributed to every post office in the United States, so that every employee and patron would be aware of the new foreign mail conventions.
Postmaster General John Wanamaker was especially enthusiastic. In this climate of reaching beyond borders and to a broader postal world, the New York office designed its greeting card.
The overall design of the card is energetic, even triumphant, which projects New York's powerful situation, grasping the banner of communications from America to Europe to Africa to Australia to Asia.
Note that the banner also embraces a holly branch to evoke the December holiday. The seal in the upper right, used by the New York office for decades, features a sealed letter without superscription.
The radiating wheel shape on the seal evokes the innovative sorting tables created by the New York Post Office. The winged hub emphasizes the celerity of that distribution.
Now, the central female allegorical figure on the card, recumbent in the ether before a globe, is accompanied by national symbols and is similar to other images from the same period.
Columbia with a liberty cap decorated with stars. The American eagle, a stars and stripes shield.
All together, we at New York Post Office are in exuberant control of the spread of United States mail to the whole of the reach of the UPU.
In pondering the design for the next year's greeting card, the New York Post Office would have considered the World's Fair that was supposed to open in 1892, but was delayed till 93.
Postal employees were made aware of the extensive plans for representing the Post Office Department at the fair. Items had been shipped to Chicago in 1892 to exhibit at a postal museum, and more articles were solicited.
Foreign governments contributed.
The card sent to welcome in 1893 showed no holly branch, freeing it from December associations. The New York seal is joined by the National Post Office Department seal. That's an express rider, perhaps based on a Benjamin Franklin design that had been the official logo since 1837.
It is possible that this card was distributed as a souvenir at the World's Fair.
Postal communication is depicted as a scattering of envelopes. This casual atomizing of mail distribution was common to UPU and international mail iconography. Both the poster and postage stamp images here are from 1900.
This seems an audacious mythic reduction of the complex mechanisms of international postal systems.
The letters are superscribed to places served by the UPU. The colonies that would make up Australia didn't completely unified until 1900.
The double hemisphere image, two worlds, was common to much of the World's Fair iconography. The advertising printed on the Columbian attire, mirroring both the color and shape, exemplifies the business use of the Columbian series of stamps.
On the left, the name of the newspaper in Racine replaces United States. At top, the Wisconsin state insignia replaces the national shield. At bottom, the state animal, a beaver, replaces the eagle. And the paper's slogan is a banner across both hemispheres, replacing the head of Columbus on the Western Hemisphere and of Columbia on the Eastern.
The cable piano trade card was distributed at the fair. The company's slogan, "Make the whole world kin," resonates with the postal mantle of the UPU.
Although we know that an 1894 UPU New Year's card was produced by the New York Post Office, we haven't been able to locate an image.
In the preceding year, the country had suffered a financial depression, and the New York City Post Office was still deemed to need renovation to handle the world's through mail.
The card designed at the end of 1894 introduced a strikingly modern figure of Columbia. She's wearing the American flag and is freed from other nationalist symbols.
She scatters the mail as it descends on rays from the New York City Post Office, flanked by its previous repurposed and inadequate locations.
The rays emanate from a guiding star in the foundation of the 1875 building, and a star has also been added to the seal of the United States Post Office Department.
The back of the card now features the system of the New York office. The postmaster and his middle managers at the main office and 23 branch stations. Postmaster Charles Dayton wrote about the heroic scale of his office in an 1894 article published in the North American Review.
Postmaster General John Wanamaker had had great hopes for the Columbian postage stamps. They would create an interest in the post office in this country and abroad that would help it financially, partly by feeding the mania for collecting stamps that is universal throughout the world.
But the designs did not appeal to collectors. The post office lost money on them and switched printing stamps from the American Banknote Company to the Bureau of Engraving and Printing.
For the 1896 card, a different palette of national icons was used. A native warrior with spear and club, native sumac in the background, and heraldic shields for the state of New York at top and the city of New York, as well as the national eagle.
The back of the card shows the postal employees and reveals another branch station opening.
The vignette of the steamship is either the Paris or the New York, illustrating the transit of mail through New York and onto rail distribution indicated by the vignette at the top.
The vignette at right references free city delivery with a network of pillar boxes. The rounded top style with the drop front was patented in 1891. The color was not specified.
And the trolley vignette in the lower margin celebrates a new service whereby mail could be received and sorted on board a cable car, as well as closed pouches exchanged between stations all the way from the main post office in Lower Manhattan north to 125th Street.
Washington, D.C. hosted the next Congress of the Universal Postal Union and would have been of paramount interest in designing the greeting card for 1897.
The Postmaster General expressed his hopes that the United States would measure up to the standards of hospitality that such a momentous occasion demanded. Bern, Paris, Lisbon, Vienna, and now Washington.
The postal facilities of every country are part of the postal facilities of all others. Letters for a single fee of 5 cents are delivered with speed, safety, and certainty.
It is possible that this card, although still designed to celebrate a new year, was given to delegates at the UPU Congress in June. There's no holiday theme, just a simple evocation of the steamship and railway train that handled mail through New York City, set against crossed palm branches, pinned by the office seal mounted on the national seal.
Note that the speedy transcontinental train approaches a mail crane so that a bag could be snatched without the train slowing.
Now, the 1897 card was printed as a folder with the list of employees at the New York office appearing inside.
This allowed for blank surfaces, perhaps to be overprinted, and would have been made a more elegant presentation at the Congress in Washington, where New York Postmaster Dayton was an attendee.
Postmaster General James Gary also attended the Congress and enthused about it.
And the delegates were not restricted to meetings in Washington, but were treated to a 3,000-mile tour via a special excursion train all the way to Chicago.
Now, the first pneumatic tube system to move mail in the United States was built in Philadelphia in 1893. But one for New York had been recommended in 1890, particularly to link Brooklyn with Manhattan.
The 1897 design for the 1898 card featured an image of the main post office system that had been inaugurated that year to connect with the produce market, surrounded by seals and vignettes and smothered in holly.
The central image is based on a woodcut of the pneumatic receiver and transmitter at Main Station, published in Scientific American.
A star still guides the post rider in the departmental seal.
The back of the card shows a change in postmaster to Cornelius Van Cott, who had been postmaster earlier and who had ordered those first cards that we've discussed today.
The New York Post Office had continued to grow, and with 5 more branch stations to boot.
Vignettes add the pneumatic tube distribution of bundled letters faced with addresses and stamps to that performed by trolley and wagon.
A pneumatic tube link to Brooklyn was realized in 1902.
The Post Office Department budget for 1898 included coverage for 2 innovations important to the New York City office. The pneumatic tube linked to the produce exchange was one, but another was for a special steamboat to expedite mail from incoming steamships in New York Harbor. Through sacks could go directly to the railway stations.
So the obvious design for 1899 celebrated this first United States mail transfer ship in service as of January 1st. The office seal is attached to a ribbon dangling from a holly bough surrounding an artist's rendition of the mail being transferred at the quarantine station.
The steamship is the New York. The transfer ship would have been the Postmaster General.
Down the chute would have come a full European mail.
Scribner's magazine fully described this process. Here is C Post Office Room on board the steamship New York, where bundled newspapers are tossed into waiting distribution sacks and letters sorted into a case.
On board the transfer ship, Postmaster General, a postal crew checks receipt of incoming mail sacks against the manifest.
And the sacks coming in from the transfer ship are then carted to the main office and handled in the foreign department.
At the door of the New York main office, outgoing sacks of foreign mails are loaded onto trucks provided by the steamship companies for delivery to the ship in the harbor.
The steamship New York continued to be the preferred icon for the international reach of both the city and its post office.
This card, which had been authorized by the Congress of Vienna in 1891, was mailed in 1904 from the St. Louis World's Fair.
And New York City was the principal subject of pioneering postcards before the 1898 ruling.
In preparation for the 25th anniversary of the UPU, the United States Post Office Department designated 2 representatives to go to Bern for the celebration, one being the departmental superintendent of the foreign mails.
The back of the 1899 card records the postal staff of the New York office. There are no new branches, but brandished are the circular date stamps of 10 military bases outside the United States. Yamokuri has remarked, although some of the dates on these markings coincide with the opening of some of the military postal stations in Cuba, others are not accurate. For instance, the date of the Santiago postal station is June 9th, 1898. That's the one on the top left. But US troops did not start landing near Santiago until late June, and the city was not occupied until late July.
In actual examples of Cuban circular date stamps of the period, the date appears right under the station number and above the name of the station.
The American line steamships also went to war, as the Act of 1891 had intended.
New York's handling of foreign mail was compared to the operations of a battleship. In July 1899, an article on the New York Post Office declared, "The wagon loads of sacks melt before the vigorous and steady onslaught, as did the Spanish fleet before Dewey's guns."
America embraced the bellicose metaphors.
News of Admiral Dewey's battle in Manila, August 1898, had electrified the American public. He returned from the Philippines in September 1899 to a two-day Heroes Parade in New York City.
The United States was flexing its imperial muscles, adding its first foreign conquest to the continental states.
And New York, already part of the Empire State itself, thanks to the penetration of the Erie Canal earlier in the century, could now imagine itself as the imperial city of the New World.
So, in the period 1891 to 1899, and with the designs of 8 greeting cards, the Post Office of New York City reached out to the UPU to strengthen an identity as a communication hub between an international city and the rest of the globe via an increasingly efficient maritime network.
Thank you. I guess we may ask for questions. And we'll try to repeat the questions so you'll know.
Yes. We purchase them, and of course, we are always on the outlook for others. Of course, as all the other people who know we collect these things are on the outlook also. I have been able to document that the one that we think was probably given out at the Columbian Exposition, and which was actually printed by a different printer than all the others, that's the only one that I have found more than one other copy of. There were a group of them which included 1900 and 1901, sold by Siegel many years ago. I don't know whether ours originally were part of that or not. There was one, and this really rots my socks. There was the 1894 one, was on hip stamp, and I saw it briefly. It had already been sold, and before I could do a screenshot, it was gone. And so somebody out there has the 1894, and I would love to hear what it looked like.
Robbie?
So the question is, are any of these cards, obviously meant for the UPU, are any of them in the UPU archives? That's a question I asked and have not received a reply. Ravi?
The observation was that particularly the U.S. Department of State employed dispatch agents at the dispatching offices, such as in New York City, and whether or not we had run into their activities is part of our investigation of these matters. And no, we hadn't. But we did find ourselves deeply enmeshed in this idea of the sea post office, which likewise seems not to be very well managed either, and that we can imagine a whole cadre of ancillary agents and activities alongside the mails, which depend upon the mails in some way, but which are outside of the mails and which we ought to become aware of. Thank you for drawing our attention to that.
To read this, because we're talking about these huge mails. Look at that, 6 months in 1894, received at the New York Post Office, open transatlantic mails. Over 11 million letters, of which over 2 million were addressed for delivery in New York. Also, almost 21,000 sacks of newspapers, printed matter, etc. Over 6,000 of which contained matter for distribution in New York City. These figures do not include mail received from South America, West Indies, and overland from China, Japan, Australia, and Hawaii, nor mails received in sealed sacks to be forwarded unopened to Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, St. Louis, and other large cities which exchanged direct mails with Europe. So those were those sacks that would go directly to the railways. During the same period, this is 6 months, the number of letters and postal cards made up in open and closed mails at the New York Post Office alone was over 14 million, in addition to printed matter. Transatlantic service was performed by 12 steamship lines, not just the American one, making 634 round trips and conveying about 65 million letters and postal cards. It was called, and still is when you look it up, the City Hall Post Office, which is not to say that it contained the City Hall. It was because it was built on City Hall Park. That building in the background, you can just see on the left, that's part of City Hall. It was a huge building that was that whole side of the park. And then you notice that although everything about it that said, oh, we're so proud it's 1875, it took them to 1879 to move in completely because it was so complicated. It did also contain the courthouse.
City Hall Park was, isn't that, the Twin Towers were adjacent to that site too?
Yeah, park doesn't exist either. Try as I might, I have found out nothing about the printing of them. I know the printer. The printer was known, and this is sort of interesting, the printer was known for very elaborate presentation certificates. So that was nice to know that they chose one of those, there are so many printers in New York City, that they chose that one. They aren't postcards, they aren't postcard size. They're larger than postcard size. And although the first ones had a blank back, they probably wouldn't have been sent through the mail. And we're not even certain how they were distributed at all, or how the ones we have and the few that are out there in other hands, how they ended up.
Lithograph card.
Oh, the likely number for a lithograph card was 10,000 of the inexpensive ones. And none of these would have been hideously expensive, although they weren't cheap. But I think the most I noted were 4 lithographic stones. So probably, I mean, as many as 10,000. Certainly for the Columbian, the distribution of the free cards at the Columbian, 10,000 would have been a reasonable number.
Benjamin Combs had a question.
Yes. Oh, that's a good question, because the cards that we were showing, of course, were only showing the middle managers. There would have been hundreds.
Perhaps thousands. The official register of the United States, published biennially, lists all the federal employees, which would include the carriers, not only at the New York Post Office, but the clerks. But I don't know the numbers, but my guess is thousands. Yeah. And they're indexed. I mean, you can look them up by name in the index and find these guys where they were clerking.
Briefly back to pneumatic systems, New York City was sort of infamous for a time for having a pneumatic subway car. that was experimented with in the 1850s, and it failed, or that perhaps failed to get enough backing, and was just buried. And when, I've forgotten which subway line, perhaps the 3rd Avenue subway line, when they were excavating for, they found this buried car, which was pretty exciting. Yeah. Any other questions?